Should we read anything into the fact that U.S. lawmakers did not try to block the administration's move?
Absolutely, Mark. When the administration set forward on this 45-day notification period, there was an assumption that lawmakers in both chambers, Republicans who lead the Senate, Republicans who lead the House, would attempt to block this, which they would have every right to do. There was no effort whatsoever that we saw. And I think what that underscores right now, at least according to administration officials I've talked to about this, is two things. One, they see the writing on the wall. The polling, the numbers do not look good in trying to stand in the way of this type of issue right now. And the other thing is, they have very, very full plates right now. There is not a big sense that they can block much of what the administration wants to do unilaterally through this, so they're not going to waste the time or the political capital trying to make this a huge fight on Capitol Hill. Mark, that's a really big deal.
Mr. Penate, a statement Friday from the U.S. State Department, it read in part, and I quote, "While the United States has significant concerns and disagreements with a wide range of Cuba's policies and actions, these fall outside the criteria relevant to the rescission of a state-sponsor of terrorism designation." That's a quote. Yeah. But those criteria, are they relevant to American businesses and to investors?
Well, the criteria you're referring to is the fact that if you've sponsored states terrorism in the last 6 months, you cannot get off that list. The implication of what this statement means for American business is that American banking is possible in Cuba going forward. Correspondent banks, correspondent accounts may now be open, but the fact that Cuba is now off that list will, I think, in my view, encourage U.S. banks to do business in Cuba and facilitate exports to the island.
Sir, will we see the banks heading there en masse?
No, I don't think so. Right now, the only bank that is actually dealing with the Cubans is a Florida-based bank called Stonegate Bank. I think that it will take some time for U.S. financial institutions to become more comfortable in doing business with Cuba, but in good time, I think things will happen.
Phil, this is happening, as you well know, during the middle of a hotly contested political climate. We're still months away from the presidential election, but as you know, these campaign seasons start early. What type of reverberations did Friday's announcement have on the political climate?
It took about 30 minutes for Jeb Bush, who is not actually a declared candidate yet, but everybody expects him to launch a campaign for the Republican nomination soon, to come out and obviously as the former governor of Florida, he's very opposed to what the administration's been doing here. Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants, took a similar tone here. But Mark, on the Democratic side, one of the first people actually to make this move in a prominent position in terms of supporting the normalization of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Cuba was Hillary Clinton. She almost led the way on this, at least from a rhetorical standpoint. So what's going to be really interesting to see, the Republicans are pretty lined up on the same side on this issue. If the general election occurs and it's Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton versus Marco Rubio, this is an issue that will come up, that there is a difference in, and it'll be interesting to see how both of those campaigns attempt to position themselves around this issue specifically.
Mr. Penate, Cuba has the lowest internet penetration rate in the world. How can an American company successfully do business there?
Well, they can by working with the Cuban government in order to enhance and improve the internet system, which is, as you say, totally deficient.
Is that something that might be forthcoming, an American business being able to work with the Cuban government?
Assuming the Cubans want it to happen, and I think they do, yes, that's very, very possible. And with the Cuba leaving the state sponsors of terrorism list, financing for such projects becomes more feasible.
Sir, Congress would have to sign off on the full restoration of diplomatic relations with Cuba. And in order for that to happen, the trade embargo on Cuba that's been in effect since 1960 would have to be lifted. Do we have any sense that that might happen near term?
Not near term. I think great progress has been made in that direction, but that is a political issue as to when the votes are there in Congress to lift the embargo. And let me emphasize that simply because Cuba is now off the list of state sponsors of terrorism doesn't mean the embargo has been lifted.
So was this more symbolic than anything?
Well, it's symbolic, but with importance, because it is a step in that direction, which may happen, in the next few years.
Phil Mattingly, did President Obama have to expend a lot of political capital doing this?
I think surprisingly less than they even expected. I think when this was announced, it really took everybody off guard. We knew that they were working towards some type of normalization, but not a full-blown one. I think everybody thought there would be a step-by-step process. When the Obama administration announced this, when Alan Gross was returned from Cuba, where he'd been held prisoner, they really went all in on this. I think they expected there would have to be a lot of work done behind the scenes, particularly on Capitol Hill. Look, that doesn't mean there are not a serious group of lawmakers, powerful lawmakers, that have major problems with this and will, in the future, perhaps through things like appropriations bills, try to attach restrictions to this. But in large part, they've noticed through public opinion polls and through a lot of the 534 current members of Congress right now, there just hasn't been the major backlash, save for some of the campaign rhetoric.
Sir, we have less than a minute left. Tourism in Cuba, it's risen about 36% since January.
Yes.
What's that country going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
Oh, it's going to look very different than it does today. I mean, tourism is still, prohibited by the embargo. A lot of that tourism is European and otherwise. But I think you'll see tremendous amount of foreign investment in Cuba over the next 5 years. I think if the Cubans want it to happen, it will happen.
Just quickly, we spoke about lifting the embargo.
Yep.
It's not going to happen while Barack Obama's in the White House, will it?
I don't think so.
Republican president, maybe?
Yes. That's my guess.